Good morning. I'm going to start the service this morning with a medieval Jewish story. A rabbi spoke with God about heaven and hell. "I will show you hell," God said, and they went into a room which had a large pot of stew in the middle. The smell was delicious, but around the pot sat people who were famished and desperate. All were holding spoons with the very long handles which reached to the pot. But because the handles of the spoons were longer than their arms, it was impossible to get the stew back into their mouths. "Now I will show you heaven," God said, and they went into an identical room. There was a similar pot of stew, and the people had identical spoons, but they were well-nourished and happy. "It's simple," God said. "You see, they have learned to feed one another." Good morning and welcome to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church this Sunday morning for our online service. My name is Brian, and I will be your leader today. We do have a few announcements. Please remember that the church is still taking pledges. If you have not made your pledge or just forgot, you can still send those in. Also remember that though we are far apart, if you have pastoral care needs, you can contact Reverend Will Humphrey at 740-263-1171 or email to will.allsouls@gmail.com. We have one birthday this week, and happy birthday to Cynthia Pips. Let us prepare for this day, open our hearts and our minds as we begin with the prelude. Please listen as the trio plays The Holly and the Ivy. At this time, I invite you to light a candle in your place of worship as we open the service with these words. From our hymnal number 654, this is Impassioned Clay. Deep in ourselves resides the religious impulse. Out of the passions of our clay it rises. We have religion when we stop deluding ourselves that we are self-sufficient, self-sustaining, or self-derived. We have religion when we hold some hope beyond the present, some self-respect beyond our failures. We have religion when our hearts are capable of leaping up at beauty, when our nerves are edged by some dream in the heart. We have religion when we have an unbiding gratitude for all that we have received. We have religion when we look upon people with all their failings and still find in them good. When we look beyond people to the grandeur and nature and to the purpose in our own heart. We have religion when we have done all that we can and then in confidence entrust ourselves to the life that is larger than ourselves. We'll now take a moment for you to share joys and concerns. It says, please type in a message in the text box for all to see and respond to. We light this candle for all those joys we share today. We light this candle for all those concerns we share today. And we light this candle for all those joys and concerns we hold in our hearts. At this time, I would like to invite our Reverend Will Humphrey up to the podium, and he has our pastoral prayer this morning.
Good morning. This is the second Sunday of Advent, the time of waiting. And our prayer today is acknowledging this waiting. Will you pray with me? In this time of waiting, may we hold the world in our hearts. In this time of waiting, may we hold our connection to one another in our hands and in our minds. In this time of waiting, may we be thoughtful and introspective. In this time of waiting, may we delight in the darkness and all that it teaches us. In this time of waiting, may we rekindle the fires of hope, of love, of joy, and peace within ourselves, within our families, within our neighborhoods and communities. In this time of waiting, may we become ready for the coming day. In the name of all that is good and all that is hopeful and all that is lovely, may we be well, may we be happy and peaceful, may no harm come to us. May we have patience and courage and understanding and determination. May it be so. Amen.
Peace be with you. Our affirmation this morning is also from our hymnal. It is number 607. It's called Beloved Presence. Cloak yourself in 1,000 ways. Still shall I know you, my beloved. Veil yourself with every enchantment, and yet I shall feel you, presence, most dear, close and intimate. I shall salute you in the springing of the cypresses, and in the sheen of the lakes, the laughter of the fountains. I shall surely see you in the tumbling clouds, in brightly embroidered meadows. Oh, beloved presence, more beautiful than all the stars together. I trace your face in the ivy that climbs, in the clusters of grapes, in the morning flaming the mountains, and the clear arch of the sky. You gladden the whole earth and make every heart great. You are the breathing of the world. We'll now take a moment for our offertory. Remember that if you would like to pledge or donate to All Souls electronically, you may download the Tithely app available for both Android and iPhone. Use the link scrolling below to find out more. The offering is accepted and grateful appreciates so that we may continue the good work of our church in our community and the world at large. Our offertory hymn this morning, played by Shelley, is O Come, Emmanuel. We will now take a moment for meditation, if you would like to sit comfortably. I chose a meditation called A Pagan Thanksgiving Prayer. Many of us just shared Thanksgiving, and for the first time, possibly without our families. We stayed home and we stayed apart. I chose this prayer because it maybe offers something a little bit more than our traditional get-togethers. Lord and Lady, we give thanks this day for all the blessings you send our way. We honor and thank you, element of earth, for the fruits and nuts for which we feed. Throughout the days, both behind and ahead, you provide for us our every need. We honor and thank you, element of fire, warming the soul, invoking living spark. You align us with our will and shine light for us in growing dark. We honor and thank you, element of water, pure flow of coolness. You quench our thirst. You represent our emotional balance, earth's mother's milk of which we nurse. We honor and thank you, element of air. Your wind flies high, the seed, in the storm and in the breeze. You find the words to suit our need. Lord and Lady, we give thanks this day for all the blessings you send our way. Our speaker this morning is Ron Boyd. He's going to talk about the alphabet versus the goddess. Based on Leonard Schlain's book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, we explore this premise that the rise of the alphabet and literacy may have had a direct correlation to the disappearance of the goddess in cultures. The rise of monotheism, its ensuing ramifications, and why this trend may now be reversing. Please welcome this morning's speaker, Ron Boyd.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you again. We'll begin this morning with the alphabet versus the goddess. Bear with me one moment. I'm going to adjust my sound. So my questions about the goddess began in early childhood. Before my parents became Jehovah's Witnesses, they were involved somewhat with the Grange or Patrons of Husbandry organization, a group formed for farmers to lobby on issues related to agriculture. I can vaguely remember being at Grange meetings when I was very little, and I have some recollection of being present while some of the rituals were taking place, but I was really too young to understand what it all meant. Some years later, I remember my mother telling me that they used concepts of goddesses in their organization. But this information was coupled with her witness perspective that these were rooted in pagan beliefs and were therefore a part of false worship. In my research, I have learned that the goddesses used by the Grange were Flora, goddess of flowers, Pomona, goddess of fruits, and Ceres, goddess of agriculture. It is known that one of the primary founders of the Patrons of Husbandry was also a Freemason and derived many of the rituals in Grange from this background. So this early exposure to these concepts contrasted sharply with my religious upbringing in a small Christian sect with deep roots in Jewish theology, a theology that was presented to me as being monotheistic and patriarchal. To a young child, the intricacies of this contrast are not likely to be understood, since there is so much history behind it. But it sets in motion a series of questions that I think inevitably must be answered. At some point, it must be acknowledged that clearly there is a conflict that exists. To some, it seems to be very important that God be a male. And even if they hedge by saying that God possesses both masculine and feminine properties, and that God is just a generic term, it still seems there's a gender bias by using the term God instead of the feminine form of goddess. Of course, it is probably only a coincidence that a lot of the history of this God just happens to be written and compiled by men, and certainly no conflicts of interest exist there. And as we all know, male scholars are always completely objective and without bias. Add to this what until modern times has been an exclusively male priesthood, and an unmistakable pattern emerges. Knowing that in earlier time periods or in other cultures, worship of the goddess was common and accepted, further reflection might cause us to wonder how this shift came about, and perhaps why people might even go so far as to kill over it. And going just a step further, one might even ask why in many cases it is primarily the men who are doing the killing. Within our own culture, many of us likely have very similar religious roots. The dominant religious culture in our area is rooted in Judeo-Christian beliefs. From the Genesis account in the Bible, we read that God created man in his image, and from man he created woman, and she was created for man. The story later tells us how Eve, tempted by the serpent, leads to the downfall of the human race, with them entering into sin and being ejected from paradise. The story establishes from the very beginning women's inferior position, her implied unreliability, and an established hierarchy with a masculine God as the sole deity. The story, believed by scholars to have been recorded between 500 and 600 years before Christ, still influences many people's beliefs and attitudes about the nature of God and the relationship between men and women. For many, whether it pertains to the Old or New Testament scriptures, it is enough for them to say, "It is written." No further evidence or critical analysis is required. And it is for them as plain as the words on the page. One important reason for discussing theology pertains to its roots in psychology and philosophy. The first word is derived from the Greek word for soul, and the second from the two words love of wisdom. I happen to believe and actually know from experience that religion can be a positive force for change, and that this occurs on many levels. In many cases, I would suggest that the negative attitudes toward religion come about from distortions or deviations from their true message. In the wrong hands, they become a means to an end other than the original intent of the prophetic voices upon which they are based. I'm going to try to address how and why I believe these distortions come about and how they might eventually be realigned. At the core of all these problems or issues originate in the psyche. If one is to make progress in their development, there must first be an acknowledgement of a need for change. Without this, the theology of the individual becomes one where the self is supreme. I am the omniscient. I do not have beliefs. I have irrefutable truth. Much like the id, which Sigmund Freud used in his theories, it is almost as if the individual is incapable of conceiving of any reality outside their own personal knowledge and experience. So progress in the development of the psyche may in fact begin with a disconcerting notion, the painful reality of ignorance, of weakness, and of mortality. At the opposite ends of the spectrum lie truth and mystery, the known and the unknown. The paradox is that the truly courageous and wise embrace mystery and venture forth into the unknown, whereas the weak and foolish cling to the fragile illusion of certainty. Somewhere in the mix of psychology, philosophy, and theology, if we are diligent, we may find a means to a deeper and more profound level of meaning, not found in a superficial approach to our everyday conception of the world. It is to this deeper reality the prophets point. So I believe this is a good point to return to our examination of the goddess. I think there is a great injustice that has been done, and it is only beginning to be rectified. And as a male, I feel a certain obligation to initiate a long overdue reconciliation. As a species on this planet, we know that we are out of balance, but many may not completely understand the roots of this imbalance, partly because it takes place on a subconscious level. In recent years, I have seen encouraging evidence that we are in the early stages of the reemergence of the divine feminine. Drawing from Leonard Schlain's book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, I want to delve into some of these ideas a little deeper, and I would like to begin by reading an excerpt from the preface of his book. The thesis of this book occurred to me while I was on a tour of Mediterranean archaeological sites in 1991. Our group had the good fortune to have for its guide a knowledgeable University of Athens professor. At nearly every Greek site we visited, she patiently explained that the shrines we stood before had originally been consecrated to a female deity, and later, for some unknown reasons, unknown persons reconsecrated them to a male one. We traveled to Crete to wander among the impressive remains of Knossos. Elegant palace murals depicted festive court women, girl acrobats, and snake-holding priestesses, mute evidence of women's seemingly high status in Bronze Age Minoan culture. The trip ended at Ephesus on the Anatolian coast, the site of the ruins of the Temple of Artemis, the largest shrine to a female deity in the Western world. Until Christian authorities closed it in the late 4th century, a woman or a man could officially worship a goddess, and priestesses could officially perform major sacraments. As our group contemplated these, our guide told the legend of Jesus' mother, Mary, coming to Ephesus to die. The guide then pointed out the hillside on which Mary's remains were purported to have been buried. On the long bus ride back to the airport, I asked myself why Mary would have chosen a place sacred to a pagan goddess as her final resting place. Even if the legend was fiction, why did it gain credence? This led me to ponder a larger question hovering over the entire trip. What caused the disappearance of goddesses from the ancient Western world? There is overwhelming archaeological and historical evidence that during a long period of prehistory and early history, both men and women worshiped goddesses. Women function as chief priests and property commonly passed through the mother's lineage. What in culture changed to cause leaders in all Western religions to condemn goddess worship? Why were women forbidden to conduct a single significant sacrament in these religions? And why did property begin to pass only through the father's line? What event in human history could have been so pervasive and immense that it literally changed the sex of God? One of the current most commonly accepted explanations is that just before recorded history began, invading horsemen sweeping down from the north imposed their sky gods and virile ethics on the peaceful goddess cultures they vanquished. Somehow, this answer seemed to me inadequate to explain a worldwide social phenomenon that occurred everywhere civilizations emerged and which took a millennium to unfold. My Mediterranean journey coincided with the publication of my first book, Art and Physics, Parallel Visions in Space, Time, and Light, which put forth the idea that innovations in art prefigure major discoveries in physics. Art and physics are two different languages. The artist uses image and metaphor, the physicist uses numbers and equations. To sharpen the ideas I put forth in art and physics, I had immersed myself in the study of how different communication media affect society. While on that bus ride, and perhaps because of my heightened interest in how we communicate, I was struck by the thought that the demise of the goddess, the plunge in women's status, and the advent of harsh patriarchy and misogyny occurred around the time that people were learning how to read and write. Perhaps there was something in the way people acquired this new skill that changed the brain's actual structure. We know that in the developing brain of a child, differing kinds of learning will strengthen some neuronal pathways and weaken others. Extrapolating the experience of an individual to a culture, I hypothesized that when a critical mass of people within a society acquire literacy, especially alphabetic literacy, left hemispheric modes of thought are reinforced at the expense of right hemispheric ones, which manifest as a decline in the status of images, women's rights, and goddess worship. The more I turned this idea over in my mind, the more correlations appeared. I found this connection compelling and could not let it go until I had superimposed it on many different historical periods and across cultural divides. This book is the end result of this magnificent obsession. By profession, Leonard Schlain was a surgeon who headed a department at his medical center and was an associate professor of surgery at a medical school. As a vascular surgeon operating on carotid arteries, supply blood to the brain, he had the opportunity to observe firsthand the profoundly different functions performed by each of the brain's hemispheres. This unique perspective led him to propose a neuroanatomical hypothesis to explain why goddesses and priestesses disappeared from Western religions. This hypothesis will ask people to reconsider many closely held beliefs and open themselves up to entirely new ways of looking at familiar events. Because there is a patriarchy, even in non-alphabetic Eastern cultures, it was important to make a brief detour into their history to see if it would fit within the framework of his thesis. The result is a book covering many centuries and many belief systems, a few of which unfortunately received short shrift. The mission was to present his reasoning in a manageable space while providing a panoramic view of the human condition. It is known that numerous other respected explanations have been given for the dramatic events recounted, and it was not feasible to present accounts of all other historical theories. So instead, the focus is on the relationship between literacy and patriarchy. And this is the end of the excerpt from the book. So for myself, as someone who is left-handed and somewhat ambidextrous, and belongs to a segment of the population that represents only 10 to 13% of it, I have always been interested in an understanding how various regions of the brain affect how we see and relate to the world. In a recent study, researchers also discovered differences in brain activity between liberals and conservatives. Compared with liberals, conservatives process dominant emotions like anger and disgust more quickly. Research on the dream lives of Americans found that Republicans reported 3 times as many nightmares as Democrats. Conservatives were also more likely to initiate physical aggression in their dreams and were twice as likely as liberals to dream about male characters. In addition to believing in a competitive human nature and a dangerous world, right-wingers are also more likely to perceive that the world and its morality are increasingly degenerating. The term conservatives implies a desire to keep what is good and prevent it from deteriorating into something worse. The political left, in contrast, is more prone to thinking that human nature can evolve into something better. The term progressives implies this belief that the advancement of morality is possible and desirable. Clearly, there are aspects of brain functioning that can dramatically influence our behavior. So Leonard Schlain delves into this further. The cosmology of any given culture is analogous to the psyche of an individual. Its myths and religion reveal how the group psyche arrives at its values concerning sex, power, wealth, and gender roles. In hunter-gatherer societies, members generally worship a mixture of male and female spirits. In general, virile spirits tend to be more prestigious in societies that place a high value on hunting. Nurturing ones are more highly esteemed wherever gathering is the primary strategy of survival. Humankind discovered horticulture approximately 10,000 years ago in the Mediterranean, the most extensively studied region, and archaeologists have uncovered strong suggestive evidence that in all emerging agrarian civilizations surrounding the basin, Mother Goddess was a principal deity. From the outer rim of history, we begin to learn her name. In Sumer, she was Inanna. In Egypt, she was Isis. In Canaan, her name was Asherah. In Syria, she was known as Astarte. In Greece, Demeter. And in Cyprus, Aphrodite. Whatever her supplicants called her, they recognized her as the creatrix of life, nurturer of young, protector of children, and the source of milk, herds, vegetables, and grain. Since she presided over the great mystery of birth, people of this period presumed she must also hold sway over death. For several thousand years, every people throughout the Fertile Crescent venerated a deity who personified the great goddess. When we speak of this area as the cradle of civilization, we tacitly acknowledge the superior role the feminine principle played in the birth of modern humankind. But then the great goddess began to lose power. The barely legible record of the earliest written accounts, beginning about 5,000 years ago, provides intimations of her fall. Her consort, once weak and inconsequential, rapidly gained size, stature, and power, until eventually he usurped her sovereignty. The systematic political and economic subjugation of women followed. Coincidentally, slavery became commonplace. Around 1500 BC, there were hundreds of goddess-based sects around the Mediterranean basin. By the 5th century AD, they had almost been completely eradicated, by which time women were also prohibited from conducting a single major Western sacrament. In their attempts to solve the mystery of the goddess dethronement, various authors have blamed foreign invaders, the invention of private property, the formation of archaic states, the creation of surplus wealth, and the educational disadvantaging of women. While any or all of these influences may have contributed, I propose another. The decline of the goddess began when some clever Sumerian first pressed a sharp stick into wet clay and invented writing. The relentless spread of the alphabet 2,000 years later spelled her downfall. The introduction of the written word and the alphabet into the social intercourse of humans initiated a fundamental change in the way newly literate cultures understood their reality. It was this dramatic change in mindset that was primarily responsible for fostering patriarchy. The Old Testament was the first alphabetic written work to influence future ages. Attesting to its gravitas, multitudes still read it 3,000 years later. The words on its pages anchor three powerful religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each is an exemplar of patriarchy. Each monotheistic religion features an imageless father deity whose authority shines through his revealed word, sanctified in its written form. Conceiving of a deity who has no concrete image prepares the way for the kind of abstract thinking that inevitably leads to law codes, dualistic philosophy, and objective science. the signature triad of Western culture. Leonard Schlain proposes that the profound impact these ancient scriptures had upon the development of the West depended as much on their being written in an alphabet as on the moral lessons they contained. Goddess worship, feminine values, and women's power depended upon the ubiquity of the image. God worship, masculine values, and men's domination of women are bound to the written word. Word and image, like masculine and feminine, are complementary opposites. Whenever a culture elevates the written word at the expense of the image, patriarchy dominates. When the importance of the image supersedes the written word, feminine values and egalitarianism flourish. As cultures shifted from hunter-gatherers to agrarian societies or farming communities, so did their forms of worship, as Leonard Schlain explains further. The process of planting seeds and waiting for the earth to bring forth its bounty became the symbol of impregnation and gestation. The need to encourage herds to be fertile reinforced the imagery of the female as life-giver. The shift from gatherer-hunters to farmers-herders manifested symbolically in the religions of the new culture. There was a winnowing of the gatherer-hunters' multiple hunting and vegetative spirits in favor of a powerful female deity known as Earth Mother. It was not only women who prayed to her, men whose hunting prowess had once sustained whole tribes readily acknowledged her power. Since a cornucopian abundance that flowed from farming and husbandry, reduced to a trickle whenever blight, drought, or pestilence stifled the land, early agrarians believed that it was in their best interest to placate the mother goddess rather than the fierce gods of the huntsman. Women and feminine sacredness are raised to first rank. Since women played a decisive part in the domestication of plants, they became the owners of the cultivated fields, which raises their social position. But once literacy is introduced, we see a dramatic shift, for laws can now be written down, and patriarchy now comes to the fore. Forced to learn the rules of grammar, scribes introduced into culture a novel concept, the transcription of codes of human conduct, or the law. For the unlettered, conduct is regulated by taboos that are acknowledged by everyone in the tribe. Elders and shamans pass down these conventions through oral teaching. Tribal mores discourage individuality. Everyone is inextricably enmeshed in the community at large, and in general, violating a taboo brings misfortune on everyone. Breaking a law, however, singles out an individual. This significant distinction encourages individuality and ego development in literate societies. Customs organically grow with the maturing of a community. Laws press down upon the people and can be initiated and manipulated by a privileged and literate elite. Scribes transferred the authority previously vested in the shamans' chanted spells to the written word. Now an abstraction called a law was in effect, even when no one of influence was present. Posted throughout the kingdom on stone stelae, these abstractions took on a life of their own, outliving the lawgivers themselves. Civil laws bear the unmistakable imprint of rules of grammar. They are abstract, authoritative, and elude an ordinary individual's ability to tamper with them. Grammar and laws are unique to the left brain. Abstract, they're the antithesis of spontaneity and intuition, and they inherently reinforce masculine principles. The jury record of the written law's overt discrimination against the female gender, with the exception of very recent history, is testimony to the masculine bias of this innovation. The earliest Mesopotamian law code from 2350 BC, attributed to King Urukagina of Lagash, begins with a prescription against polyandry. The women of the former days used to take 2 husbands, but the women of today, if they attempt to do this, must be stoned. Patriarchy is a dominant theme of Hammurabi's code, which was promulgated at the moment in Mesopotamia's history, when written documents increased 1,000-fold, and we can safely assume so did literacy. Hammurabi's code contained one very crucial flaw. It did not apply equally to Hammurabi and its subjects. 1/4 of the code relates to women's rights, or more accurately, restrictions on women's rights. The code commands that sons honor their fathers. No similar exhortation applies to their mothers. Although the code confirms certain rights accorded to women of the upper class pertaining to property, business, and religious participation, overall women's sexual rights and freedom were sharply restricted. Eunuch chaperones and veiling became commonplace. Tiamat's downfall, the goddess of the ocean, coincided with the erection of Hammurabi's stela. When literacy fell in the Dark Ages, an interesting thing occurred. In relationship to goddess worship, it reappeared under the guise of the veneration of Mary. By canonizing the written word in the 4th century, early churchmen were convinced they had insulated Christianity from the siren song of pagan polytheism. The triune religion, as conceived by Paul, consisted of a Son, a Father, and a Holy Spirit. Subsequent church fathers were determined to crush the power of pagan goddesses. Augustine considered the worship of Earth Mother deities obscene, monstrous, and wicked. The creed of Christianity was decidedly not about a divine woman. Yet beginning in the Dark Ages, devotion to Mary blossomed throughout European Christendom. The Parthenon of Athena was rededicated to Mary circa 600 AD, as were almost all the other temples that had honored pagan goddesses. Every Mediterranean-based religion prior to Christianity built major monuments to honor its chief deity. Marduk's ziggurat, Athens' city of the horizon, the temple of Zeus at Herculaneum, and Yahweh's Temple Mount in Jerusalem exemplified the seemingly universal impulse to honor the preeminent God with outsized stone structures. The major accomplishments of the entire medieval age was the erection of great Gothic cathedrals that pierced the skies of Europe with a forest of spires. Nothing encapsulates the medieval zeitgeist better than these immense stone edifices. But the great cathedrals were not dedicated to any of the 3 male Trinitarian divinities. Instead, the 4 most magnificent cathedrals in France, Paris, Chartres, Reims, and Amiens, are all called Notre Dame, Our Lady. So too is Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, St. Sophia of Constantinople, and Frauenkirch in Munich. Civic and church leaders dedicated these churches to the mortal mother of the Christian deity. In France alone, over 100 churches and 80 cathedrals were raised in Mary's name. While most were completed after the 11th century, the initial inspiration to build them arose at the end of the Dark Ages. While Mary may not have a gospel extolling her virtues, her rise in stature is eloquently expressed by her highly visible Bible of stone dotting the European landscape. Unlike Jesus, the Dark Age Mary rarely speaks. No pithy parables or aphorisms have been attributed to her. Her subjects came to know her through image that led every procession and adorned the walls of homes, shops, churches, and crossroads. The likeness of the Blessed Mother became ubiquitous throughout Western Europe. And a new phenomenon accompanied this change, one that had been absent during Christianity's first 4 centuries. People reported seeing visions of Mary, though she rarely spoke. Ignorant shepherds and unlettered peasant girls seemed to have encountered the spectral mother far more frequently than learned churchmen. It seemed that the farther removed a person was from alphabet learning, the more likely was the church to authenticate the sighting. In the Old Testament, Yahweh's select few heard his voice or read his words. In the medieval age, people visualized her in apparitions. Despite the profusion of Mary sightings during these dark centuries, there were no sightings of the Father or the Holy Ghost, and only rarely of the Son. Alphabet cultures know gods through their words. Non-literate cultures see goddess images. Leonard Schlain proposes that Mary's rise was related directly to the collapse of alphabet literacy. Even in Arab culture, prior to the written teachings of Muhammad, we find evidence of commonplace goddess worship. Prior to Muhammad's birth, the Arabs had evolved a polytheistic religion based on the worship of the megaliths. The central object of veneration was a large black cube called the Kaaba, embedded in the earth at Mecca. Long before Muhammad's birth, Mecca was the Arabs' holiest city. Perhaps Mecca's association with agriculture accounted for the preponderance of female deities in a culture principally informed by manly virtues. 4 main stone idols ringed the shrine at Mecca. Allah and Allat were the divine male and female consorts who together ruled the supernatural world. The 2 others were the goddesses Al-Azza, which means the mighty one, and Manat, the goddess of fate. But we know little of these deities' traits, exploits, or character because almost nothing of their mythology has survived. Goddess veneration, however, was a very old Arab custom. Herodotus, writing 1,000 years before Muhammad, identified the sun goddess Alat as a major Arab deity. Attesting to her high status, Alat's other name was Al-Rabba, the sovereign. Even after the rise of Islam, the priests who attended the shrine at the Kaaba were known as the sons of the old woman. After Islam became established, Muslims referred to the period before the coming of the Prophet as the age of ignorance. So eager were they to erase all traces of what they regarded as a span of shame that very little evidence of the prior religion has survived. Having established the presence and subsequent disappearance of the goddess in numerous cultures around the world, presumably related to the conflict between word and image, right brain versus left brain, how is it that the divine feminine seems to be returning in our contemporary society, which is highly literate? Leonard Schlain suggests that this has been balanced by other mediums for communicating information that have been developed in recent history. It took quite some time to go from texts that were painstakingly copied by hand to books that were produced by printing presses. More recently, we have inventions such as photography, movies, the World Wide Web that have helped to balance the regions of the brain that we use to process information. Scientifically, we have progressed to ideas pertaining to the study of complex systems, and the use of very powerful computers allows us to develop a much deeper understanding of our interconnectedness like never before. The Earth itself is a living organism of which we are a part. She is our mother and our source of life. In reference to the environment, Pope Francis said, "The Earth should be allowed to give her fruits without being exploited." This is one of the greatest challenges of our time, to convert ourselves to a type of development that knows how to respect creation. When I look at America, and also my own homeland, South America, so many forests all cut that have become land that can no longer give life. This is our sin, exploiting the earth and not allowing her to give us what she has within her. There is a greater shift towards gender equality. Pope Francis recently had this to say: "Our Lady is more important than the apostles. She is more important. I think we have not yet made a profound theology of woman in the church. She can only do this or that. Now she is an altar server. Then she does the reading. She is president of Caritas. But there is more. A profound theology must be made of woman. This is what I think." In all of this, though, we must make clear that what must change is the cycle of dominance and submission. What we must seek is to restore balance to a world that far too long has been out of balance. Our distorted theologies have played a part in this paradigm that must be corrected. In conclusion, may we resolve to continue the struggle to restore balance to a world deeply in need of healing. May our actions honor the divine in all its forms, both God and Goddess, for it is a reflection of who we are and who we can be. May we form a perfect bond which gives birth to a world renewed. May it be so, and may you always find favor in the eyes of the Goddess. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Very informative. We appreciate you here this morning. We close the service and extinguish the chalice with these words. This is a prayer for renewal. This was written by Lori Sue Brockway. It is from a book called Discovering the Goddess. Divine Mother of all there is, whose essence lies within us all and in all things, please fill this place with your sacred light and presence. Please protect us and heal us. Please bring us to the wholeness and wisdom. Make this a day of fresh starts, new beginnings. Melt all obstacles in our path, gently, gracefully, lovingly. Reconnect us to our higher self. Awaken us to what I need to know next. Let our higher self select and connect with the divine energy that is right for us right now. May we be uplifted and empowered by your love. So be it, and so it is. I'd like to invite you back next Sunday. I'm going to be the speaker. The topic is living with contentment. And almost, as funny as that might sound, living with contentment, finishing up the year 2020. We're gonna look into that, explore how contentment, by trusting in the perfection and the harmony of the Tao. I'm going to explain that by understanding that the Tao is working for and with you, you needn't be reminded of what you crave or what you think it has forgotten on your behalf. So we'll see you next Sunday. Now please stay with us as we listen to the trio one more time as they perform Here We Come A-Wassailing.